Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us. We may as well get started here. We're right on 1 o'clock. We expect more people to be coming in over the next few minutes, but thank you, everybody who is here, for being on time. So just starting off, we need a bit of honesty. I think packaging is not an exciting topic for most people, but it is for us because we know the critical role it plays in our economy, the delivery of basic goods and services, and the impact it has on the environment. And that makes us special. So pat yourself on the back. So my name is Justin Bonzi, Principal Consultant at Edge Impact Circular Economy team. I've worked in the packaging value chain for many years, wearing many hats, but never have I seen such incredible momentum both in the private sector and at the local, state, and federal government levels for a resource-efficient packaging ecosystem, which is what brings us here today. So if you have your phone handy, I encourage you to scan the QR code on the screen so you'll be ready to add your 2 cents to 2 Slido questions that we'll get to in a few minutes. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land from which we join you today, on which we live, work, and create, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and pay my respects to their elders past and present, as well as any Indigenous Australians joining us today. We celebrate their culture, stories, traditions, and ongoing connection to land and water. For those who don't know, Gadi means grass tree and Gal means people. So Gadigal means grass tree people. Indeed, their ongoing connection to country is embedded in their very identity. I'd like to use the grass tree, which is culturally significant and has about 30 species, as an example of high-value packaging, because 1, it is very fit for purpose. 2, all parts of it can be used, the leaves as food and to make baskets and knives, seeds ground into flour to make bread, flowers as food, the flower stem itself as a spear, and resin as an adhesive and medicine. And 3, of course, grass trees are reusable and renewable. So indeed, nature's ultimate packaging and a poignant reminder of our connection to the natural world. So here's the plan for the webinar today. After a quick overview of why we're here and some of the opportunities to drive business-wide sustainability, I'll hand over to Edge's packaging lead, Mike Turnbull, to introduce the speakers and facilitate the panel discussion. By design, you'll notice that our speakers represent organizations operating both B2C and B2B packaging models, so we'll be able to share a range of valuable perspectives on both. Before we begin, a bit of housekeeping. It is a full house today, so everyone but the speakers will be on mute to avoid those awkward moments. The session will be recorded, and the slides and recording will be made available to all registrants after the webinar. We have a lot of time for questions after the panel discussion, so please pop any questions you have in the Q&A chat as we go, and we will try to get to as many of them as we can. No guarantees, just due to the nature of very limited time today, but we'll absolutely try our best. So now it's time for a pop quiz. If you haven't yet, please scan the QR code on your screen and help us gauge who's in the room and the challenges we collectively face. So bear with me as I click over to Slido. Okay, let me make sure I get this right here. Okay, hopefully everybody can see this. So the first question, what industry are you in? So if you could please start entering your responses, just gives us an idea of who's here today. There's obviously a lot of different organizations that are interested in packaging, which is why our session today is so exciting, because it really touches everyone. So consulting is a big one. Hopefully that's not my my Edge colleagues just punching in consulting, because that does skew the results. But outside of consulting, we have manufacturing, retail, food manufacturing, FMCG, circular economy, organics, government. Yeah, retail. So that's great. That's pretty much in line with what we would expect. And a lot of these topics we will be covering today. So we'll just give it a couple more seconds. like the one, there's one here, lightning. I'm guessing that's lighting, but I really like the lightning. So maybe we just stick with that one because it definitely provides a spark for today's discussion. All right, fantastic. So what we'll do afterwards as well, when we send, we'll be sending everybody a follow-up email after the webinar. We might just take a screenshot of this and throw it in the deck, just so we have an idea of who's here. So next question. What is the most significant challenge of packaging for you? Keeping up with the changes, absolutely. A lot of regulatory and legislative changes in recent years, which is very much a good thing as well because we need it. Yeah, recyclability is a big one. Looks like competition with lower cost disposables, which is what makes the case for reusables a little bit more difficult. But luckily, we have Damian here from Label Makers today, and he's going to talk about the business case for reusables and how that stacks up, which is fantastic. Recycled content absolutely is a big one. That was mentioned in the DQ announcement yesterday. And we have Andrew Smyth here from Pact, who will absolutely share some perspectives on recycled content. Imagine he would know it probably better than anybody else. So we have greenwashing, sustainable materials, so that's material selection, PFAS, obviously is a chemical of concern, change management, which is a big one, embedding these changes within organizations and making sure that everybody's on board, sourcing materials, which goes to procurement, labeling, end of life. Yeah, these are really, really great. So obviously there's a lot of people in the room who know packaging well and the challenges that we face collectively. So if you haven't finished yet, please feel free to keep throwing some responses in there. And again, we'll take a screenshot and put it in the deck. So I am going to go back to the deck and okay, can everybody see that okay?
We can see the presenter mode, Justin.
Got you. Okay, hold on one second. All right, let me try that one more time. Thank you for bearing with me. All right, this should be it. Is this correct?
Perfect. Yeah, good to go.
All right. All right, thank you for that. Sorry, one second here. Okay, apologies for that. Okay, I think we're now back on track. Okay, so before we jump into the meaty bits, and thank you for bearing with me on the technical difficulties, I want to say that it's a Monday morning and just blame Monday, but unfortunately, we just need to blame me. But before we jump in, just a bit about Edge Impact. So we're a full-service sustainability consultancy that aims to create a world where sustainable is unthinkable. We combine science, strategy, and storytelling to develop robust data and evidence, strategy for a plan that works, and storytelling to inspire and drive action. Anything sustainability related, we have it all under one roof. Just a quick rundown of our areas of expertise. So don't worry about memorizing it for now. We'll share the deck after the webinar so you can spend all day memorizing it then. But most relevant to the packaging discussion today is our circular economy team, which specializes in circular economy waste strategy, materials and waste baseline opportunity analysis, packaging strategy and APCO reporting, circular procurement, recycled content strategy and verification, circular economy training and engagement, and waste audits and management plans, with a lot of things in between. And across all of our other service areas, we cover just about everything from decarbonization, life cycle assessment, supply chain engagement, sustainable infrastructure, nature and biodiversity, modern slavery, brand and communications, you name it. We also support reporting. So a lot of organizations looking towards the upcoming mandated reporting requirements. So enough of that. Why are we here today? Yesterday, as many of you know, the Australian government's Department of Climate Change, Energy and the Environment and Water, or DQ, announced 3 much anticipated regulatory options for improving the Australian packaging ecosystem. So the first is strengthening administration of the existing co-regulatory arrangements. The second, introducing national mandatory requirements for packaging. And the third, employing a national extended producer responsibility scheme. So Chris will cover this in more detail in his talk, so I'll just leave this here for now. But the main point that I wanted to emphasize before we dig in is that although the exact mechanisms underlying each option vary, the fundamental principles for improving our packaging value chain are consistent: better design, clear labeling, and meeting recycled content thresholds. So regardless of the reforms that are introduced, now is absolutely the time for brand owners and anybody involved in packaging to start preparing. And beyond national packaging reform, packaging touches so many parts of a business, making packaging an ideal gateway to drive business-wide sustainability with a broad range of benefits that go well beyond packaging itself. So just going through some of these quickly. So baselining and life cycle assessment, we know that data is critical. So regardless of what reform eventually is adopted, data is going to be absolutely critical. And that's going to be important for any business with packaging. So if you have the baseline, then you can then monitor progress moving forward. You can look at potential trade-offs. You have the data you need for both packaging and overall sustainability reporting. And it's important to build in data capture mechanisms to establish a baseline and monitor progress. Leveraging LCA. So not everybody uses an LCA, but it is a very useful tool to determine the environmental impact of packaging products and services, including emissions and decision-making scenarios. The second here is mandatory reporting and emissions, of course. So packaging buyers and suppliers will soon need to quantify scopes 1 and 2 emissions, and soon scope 3 to meet mandatory climate and sustainability reporting requirements, and of course, to meet growing stakeholder expectations. So reducing your packaging footprint often means reducing emissions, and of course, lower emissions organizations and products often have a competitive advantage. So supply chain engagement and transparency. So optimizing packaging procurement by integrating sustainability goals across policies, processes, and tools is a very, very powerful way to get the outcomes we want for sustainable packaging. Engaging your supply chain on recycled content, sustainable packaging guidelines that APCO has provided, and of course, traceability to improve data and reduce risk. And I'll point everyone to the National Framework for Recycled Content Traceability if you're not aware of it yet. It's a great framework, fantastic tools available to anyone. And the last, of course, greenwashing. Make only evidence-based claims on products and packaging. We know that the APCO is cracking down on environmental claims. And with any claim, it's important to do due diligence to ensure what you are communicating is factual. So without further ado, yep, that covers it. I'll now hand over to my colleague and Edge's packaging lead, Mike Turnbull.
Yeah, thanks, Justin. Thank you, everyone, for joining. My name is Mike. I'm a managing consultant at Edge, and I'm very excited to be here today introducing the panel of speakers that we have available. As mentioned, first and foremost, we'll hear from Chris, who's the CEO of APCO. Then we'll hand over to Turnbull, who is the Group Sustainability Manager at Super Retail Group, or SRG. We'll then hear from Damian Smyth, the Environment and Sustainability Manager at Label Makers. And finally, last but not least, we'll hear from Andrew Smyth, the Executive Advisor of Circular Economy at Pact Group. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Chris. Chris leads the development and execution of strategies that bring business, governments, and industries together to design, use, recover, reuse, and recycle packaging. Chris has extensive experience in driving system changes to deliver sustainability, product stewardship, and corporate reputation outcomes. Chris, over to you to talk about DQ as well as the APCO 2030 plan.
Great, thanks, Mike. Is my slide coming up? Yes. So just as a note for all concerned So I'm obviously from APCO, but it's really timely that we frame up today's conversation, which Edge is facilitating, with reference to what DQ announced yesterday. So please don't misunderstand that all I'm really doing is trying to summarize what came out yesterday from DQ. And it's government who set policy, but not APCO as a co-regulator. So DQ's objectives for reform are threefold, and I think the headline here is that it's happening. And if you're a brand owner on the call or in the value chain, finally there's going to be real momentum over coming months around the reform process for packaging. I think the objectives that we take out of DQ's reform agenda, it's obviously reducing the environmental impact of packaging. It's supporting the transition to a circular economy for packaging, and their other objective is really regulation that is clear, mandatory, consistent, makes industry responsible. That's also coming through, supports innovation, and aligns with global best practice. So each one of those actually has a lot of complexity in it. As Justin flagged, they've put out three key options. That there's a discussion paper that they'll be circulating tomorrow, or an online platform that industry will be able to engage with. They've flagged three options. Obviously, the first one is strengthening the administration of the co-regulatory arrangements under the National Environmental Protection Measure, or the NEPM. That's obviously APCO's current mode of operation. It assumes that APCO would be implementing its 2030 strategy, which I will talk to in a second. And that strategy is obviously all around meeting the goals of the covenant and the national packaging targets. It would assume that there's stronger compliance and enforcement under the NEPM to reduce free riders, and obviously increased education to support behaviour change and participation by industry and community. Under option 2, by comparison, that's then actually talking about a fairly blunt approach to banning problematic materials and chemicals of concern. So it's a case of all bets are off. This is in, that's out. Progressive bans on packaging and mandates for minimum recyclability performance. It's talking to things like minimum recycled content thresholds. And under option 2, you would assume that the NEPM is repealed, and as a result, the covenant and in turn APCO would be repealed. And by default, it would be every business for themselves. Option 3, by comparison, is talking to an extended producer responsibility approach that would be supported by a central administrator or an administrative function to convene the system, coordinate activity, and drive industry level outcomes. There would be mandated requirements around things like labelling, design standards, recycled content, etc. It's also flagged that there will be fees based on packaging placed on market, eco-modulated fees, that would obviously support the role of an administrator, but also support alignment of the system and driving system change. It's important to note that they have flagged packaging obligations, and that these are beholden on industry. And they're obviously on the screen there, and that's to really place to make packaging safer, reduce waste, improve recyclability, help consumers with labelling, to make the right decisions at the end of life of packaging, obviously support increased take up of recycled content, and also creating markets for recovered materials, and then also looking at how other objectives might be and obligations might be executed. So I think everybody's now waiting with bated breath for the documentation that will follow tomorrow and the consultation process. Certainly from an APCO point of view, we're encouraging all our members, please lean in. This is a once in a generational opportunity to actually achieve change. We're certainly not suggesting for 1 minute that the current arrangements are ideal. And when I started in the role sort of just over 2 years ago as CEO, we did a deep review of the national packaging targets and what was actually blocking those targets. And we made it really clear to government that the legislative or the regulatory framework is not supporting the changes that's needed. And we've got some members doing amazing work and then looking over their shoulder at others in the same class of business, same size, but going at half the pace. So clearly things could be done differently. So more to come on that from DQ. If we just move to the next slide, probably a month ago, many of you would be aware that APCO released its 2030 strategic plan. A couple of headlines from me on this, and it actually really does back in certainly option 1 and option 3 that DQ's consulting on. Some key headlines. So I've sort of summarized what is sort of a 60-page document into one slide, but it's not business as usual. I was given a very clear message by the environment ministers who are very unified on this position, and that APCO members, industry need to lean in and change the way we're working and moving towards the national packaging targets. And they've tasked APCO with doing a couple of key things. And obviously this strategy is really in response. A key principle, there are 3 key elements to the strategy. One is that we need to change the way we calculate fees for circa 2,500 members. Currently fees are levied based on annual turnover from F27 or from July 2026. For the first time, APCO members will have their fees being eco-modulated based on, which basically is linking, instead of your fee being linked to annual turnover, and which doesn't really link to how much packaging you put into the market, or your ability to influence that packaging, it's going to be moving to eco-modulation, which is really linked to the sorts of packaging you're using and the volumes you're using. That is aimed at incentivizing and rewarding better design, design for recyclability, design for reuse, elimination, designed to accommodate recycled content. So we can get a whole lot of circular outcomes right at the front end. Those eco-modulated fees are also designed to be driving and generating additional funds that can then be used to back in the broader system. And it's great that we've got Andrew Smyth from Pact, who's down the value chain. It's businesses like that, and the collectors and the sorters and other recyclers, that if material's not worth their while touching, let alone sorting and reprocessing, why would they? So we need to create the tools and the instruments to actually give businesses across the whole value chain a business case to make change happen. There's been a lot of investment by brand owners in making their packaging technically recyclable, but it's actually not recyclable until it's recovered, sorted, cleaned, reprocessed, and comes back into life. Whether that's back into packaging or whether that's back into another form, neither here nor there. But until we close out that full value chain, it's not recycled. We're obviously also then working around the compliance and enforcement. That was another call out from ministers. We really need to strengthen what's happening in the compliance and enforcement space. We've onboarded an internal compliance task force. We're now taking members' packaging off shelf, inspecting it, doing deep dives. We're also doing deep dives on data and data quality. So comments from Justin at the front end were totally valid around data, and Mike lives in this world as far as member data goes. We're strengthening the way we're working in with state and territory EPAs as well. We're not the enforcer, states and territories are the enforcer. The third piece here is then really the end game. The end game is to increase diversion, reuse, collection, and recycling of packaging. And that's again where the funds that are secured from or taken from members through eco-modulation will then be reinvested in and across the value chain. Those funds will also be used to address gaping holes. Like at the moment, there is no national education campaign around curbside curbside collection and or other pathways. It's not all just about curbside. We know that in just as one example, rigid meat trays largely aren't collected in curbside. They're often made, they're designed to be recovered, they're designed to be recycled. What do we need to do? What are the economic gaps that we need to plug to ensure that they are actually, one, given the green light to be collected in curbside, but two, that across the value chain, they're then sorted and then reprocessed and brought back in, just as an example. So there's a lot to be done. The other piece is that all of these activities, and I think the framing coming out of yesterday's DQ announcement is that this 2030 strategy does actually back in and provide a transition pathway for members and for industry in general to the new regulatory model. And that's really important because they've also flagged issues like mandating the Australasian recycling label. These are things that for businesses on this call that aren't already doing it, the sooner you get engaged, the sooner, whether it's partnering with Edge or whether it's partnering with who or onboarding your own teams. And I think Pen from Super Retail Group will probably talk to some of her experience. And my prior life within Kmart Group as head of sustainability in that world, where we just had a massive amount of SKUs and data going everywhere. But how you use that, the sooner you get engaged, because it's coming. And it's just a case of let government go through their process to do the consultation and lock in on what the reform model is. But the sooner businesses start to really step up and into this space and use tools like the Sustainable Packaging Guidelines, like the ARL, the better, because it will bite you otherwise. So I think at that point, actually, there's another slide that I have got. That just actually talks to the different points across the value chain that we see that we've identified there being economic gaps. One's obviously design cost. We've got a knowledge gap or an education opportunity with consumers at the use and disposal point. We've got limited collection pathways for many materials and packaging formats. And then we've got a challenging space in and around the process, the reprocessing in the end markets. Often virgin materials are cheaper. There may not be end markets. There may be no incentive for infrastructure, for long-term investments. And there is a cost to collect and recycle and sort, which currently is prohibitive and means that for many of our members, APCO's members, packaging that's been designed to be recycled is not actually being recycled. So at that point, I'll hand back to you, Mike and Justin.
Thanks for that, Chris. Yeah, I think one of the staggering figures from yesterday's DQ session was, I think you mentioned around circa 2,500 APCO members, and I think they said around 2,000 brand owners that are currently non-compliant and not reporting. So it sort of emphasizes that point you're making about free riders, as well as, don't wait for this legislation. I know for a fact that the Victorian governments are chasing up compliance in the last year or so, and I'm sure the other state governments will follow suit as well and won't wait for this regulation to come into effect. So thanks for sharing your insights. I'm sure there'll be more questions to come from myself as also the audience. Particularly, I have some questions about your past experiences with Kmart as well, as I think that's really important to share. So we'll hand over to Pen now. Pen is the Group Sustainability Manager at SRG and was previously MacPac's Sustainability Manager as well. She really understands the challenges of packaging transformation and the benefits and burdens of reporting. She'll be taking us through her journey in the hope of her insights can help the audience here today improve your packaging outcomes and your approach to the annual reporting requirements as well. So I'll hand over to you, Pen.
Cool. Thanks heaps, Mike. Hi, everyone. Nice to be here. So, yeah, Super Retail Group owns Rebel, Super Cheap Auto, BC, and Macpac, and we've got stores across New Zealand and Australia, so across lots of jurisdictions, which makes packaging challenging and exciting. So I'm just going to run through some of the work that I did at Macpac and then have brought into group as well, all about transforming our packaging. So the first step really, I say, is gather the information. So whether it's actually physically handing the products in their packaging in your DCs, see how they arrive, record the components, record it, keep doing it. And also it's really useful to go onto stores and see how all of the products are actually displayed. See what other brands are doing too. That's part of the information gather. That's how you can learn some innovative ideas. When you're doing this and handling the products, that's how you kind of learn what might be unnecessary, and you'll learn about some inconsistencies. So I highly recommend at that stage to take notes. Take notes. It's going to be so useful when you do your transformation. Then the next step is to collaborate with, make sure you have the right stakeholders internally. Make sure it's a broad range as well. Share the data with them, share the insights. You know, you need people like from product development, design, graphics, safety, web store, logistics, the in-store merchandisers, people who deal with customer service. It's really important to get the right stakeholders in, because everyone needs to be educated on the why. Why is packaging important? Why does it have to be transformed? Why does it need to be better? Of course, it's because of legislation, but it's also reducing environmental impacts. It's also to align with best practice, APCO targets, customer experience. Find that people don't really engage properly until they actually understand the why. And once they know the why, that's when you can work together on the how. So part of the how is you need to analyze the data that you have, so you can gain insights on where your biggest material impacts are. You can identify similarities across ranges. You can identify some quick wins that you could just do. I have to say from my experience that collating the data, yes, it is time consuming, and it can also be really confronting. When you see the weight and the number of units for each packaging unit, can make you, you might want to cry. But it's also really empowering too, because you go, right, you're emboldened, you know where the biggest areas are, where you can make the change. So, and this is how, with the data, by analysing it, you can leverage the learnings to create some business efficiencies, like reducing the component. That's the key thing. Next thing is devote time to learning what the packaging needs are for all of the stakeholders you have, and the needs for the product type. So by learning that, you can together build the frameworks that you need so that your business can go on and be consistent, and you can agree on definitions, create rules, and also document the rationale. Why you must use, why a certain product must have its own packaging, why this must have packaging, or why it must be rigid, or whatever it is. Document the rules is really important, because it will help you with the future changes as well. You know, you might have something that's a really delicate fabric. So if that needs its own individual packaging, make a note of it and then build that into the rule. Also recommend creating preferred materials list that aligns with legislation. And because there are so many different rules currently across all the jurisdictions, we say go with the strictest and the earliest adopter. And also look to the future of what's coming and what is expected, which then ties into industry best practice and also the APCO targets. Part of this time is also you need to decide how you're going to track progress. And you also, as part of your frameworks, need to update internal processes. That's part of the education piece too. But the internal processes need to include packaging needs that meet the requirements across the supply chain. And then by doing this together, that's how you can work together to solve potential issues and discuss what your changes might be. Also recommend sharing examples of simple swap outs. Then it's about educating your trade partners. They need education on your rules, your preferred materials, and the why. For them, once again, I find visuals are really good. Visual examples of this is bad for these reasons, and this is good for these reasons. And then a hard point can be, and it will be different for every different organisation, is to decide on your starting point. Data. How are you going to start? Are you going to focus on complying with legislation? That's obviously pretty important. Or are you going to then choose to work with a certain trade partner? Or are you going to focus on a product range or a packaging type, or for your new products or for your top sellers? I find a really good way is to actually start with the area of biggest impact, because that's how your stats will look better and will stop bringing tears to your eyes. And the next step is redesigning the packaging. You know, this is an exciting bit. You're problem solving. Follow the sustainable packaging guidelines from APCO. It's really good for embedding the right mindset, and it's so holistic. You know, it's not looking at just a material swap. It's about eliminating as many components as possible. Thinking about the handling, the shipping carton efficiency, in-store displays, the optics in store as well. But it's also really important when you're redesigning to test the alternatives. And also not to get too stuck and too focused on the really hard to solve things like Kimball tags. Say focus on the big impact components. And another thing really is to learn from your trade partners, because they'll have so many other customers. So they might have trialed different things for them. They may also be able to identify some operational efficiencies that you can embed that will also reduce your packaging. So those are some, quite a few things on the list, but I think, and they all cross, a lot of it crosses over together. But I think you really need a system, framework, rules, guidelines to follow, and then that will, for consistency, also teamwork. The sense of teamwork is really valuable, because it can be challenging at times, and you need to share ideas and what people have tried in the past. I've also put in there an appreciation for data. Without data, you don't know where you're at, and you can't learn and identify these biggest impact areas, or your biggest priorities, or your highest risks. And I have to say, from doing the manual, there's nothing quite like onerous demands on data to really incentivize you to use fewer components. A holistic approach, a reduction mindset, absolutely. But also you need to have agility. You know, if you can't fix everything, focus on the legislative requirements, the biggest impacts, and the things that are easiest to improve. So that's it from me. Quick whistle stop. So I will be quiet and hand back to you, Mike.
Thanks, Pam. I'll definitely have some questions for you as well. I've seen sort of firsthand the tools you've developed in the background to support your APCO reporting, but also tracking the improvements you're making across the supply chain and how you can feed that into environmental reporting. It's a super functional tool, very usable. So thank you very much. I'd now like to hand over to Damian Smyth. Damian is the Environment and Sustainability Manager at Label Makers, and is playing an integral role in new product development and sourcing sustainable label and packaging solutions across the group. We're actually doing a project with Label Makers at the moment to baseline and assess the environmental impact of their transition from single-use fibre-based label cores to reusable PP label cores, including the economic and social benefits for their customers. But that's just one little piece that Label Makers do. I'll hand over to Damian to share his extensive experience in the industry.
Thank you, team. I'd just like to firstly thank Edge for the invitation to allow us to update brands on our label developments, aligning with the APCO Sustainable Packaging Guidelines. Just a quick overview of Label Makers. We're a leading manufacturer of labels and packaging for the FMCG sector. we're Australasia's only pressure-sensitive label manufacturer. That puts us uniquely positioned to be able to customise label structures for our recycling infrastructure, whether it be the face stock, the adhesive, or the label liner. So for us, if you want to jump to the second slide. Thank you. For us, the objective is to deliver a scalable end-of-life strategy to recover all the packaging components for both ourselves and our brands, which, if we're able to crack the code on a recycling solution internally, we will be offering that to our brands for some products where the label and the liner are laminated together, where it's technically a problematic material. What options are we looking to offer our customers in allowing them to be able to keep those sort of products out of landfill? So the hero project for us, that's been going for a number of years now, which some of the attendees may be aware of, is focusing on the primary packaging of material, which we're looking at in this case is the natural food grade HDPE for the dairy industry. I sort of broke it up into the label design objectives, the innovation, and the positive impact based on the work that we've done in conjunction with collaborative partners, being the two leading recyclers in Australia. So for us, from a label position, is having a label that will separate cleanly from the HDPE bottle during the recycling process, and remove the adhesive and ink and allow the greatest opportunity for the HDPE to move through to the resin side. Currently, from a label position, and has been for a number of years now, labels are manufactured of a similar specific gravity polymer type to the natural HDPE milk bottle. So when the material goes through the recycling streams, it is very difficult to have that product sink and float in the recycling infrastructure. So us moving forward is looking at how can we understand the recycling infrastructure and what label options we would have. So we've just identified here that we can manufacture a label that is made from the bottle. So the label and the bottle are made from the same polymer type. With a wash-off ink and adhesive, it may allow for that label to be incorporated back into the bottle, which will reduce the amount of material, albeit small, that's heading to landfill from the label removal in that process. And from the work that we've done so far, the impact of moving to a technology, either be a separable label of the same bottle type or a label that will sink and float in the recycling process, have an impact from the current state of 5% to optimistically 30%. At this stage, it's been done at laboratory scale. We're looking to scale that up in the next 6 months to be able to quantify and to be able to report to industry, specifically the dairy industry, that moving that needle and availability of continuation of HDPE sourced from Australian manufacturers is what we are focusing on. So that collaboration for us is critical in that supply chain, particularly around the natural HD rigid food packaging. So that's my summary. I may have pulled up short.
No, that's fine, Damian. I found it when we first met. I remember you telling me, yeah, I suppose it was an oversight from my perspective. I remember thinking that milk bottles would probably be one of the most recyclable things in your commingled stream, and you mentioned that it was, was it 5 or 8% of milk bottles are currently recycled in Australia, which is a crazy number, and I suppose emphasises how important it is to get the label right and how that could be ultimately the crux whether something is recycled or not.
Absolutely, and our the label makers' presence in the dairy space is strong. So having the larger brands look at transitioning, adopting, qualifying these alternative materials can definitely move the needle.
Yeah,
in a big way
definitely.
from an industry position.
I'd also be interested to understand more about the work that I suppose the business case that you were putting together for, and the thinking behind it as well around that internal take-back scheme for the reusable cores and how that could benefit customers. I know reuse is often sort of fraught with caution just because of how logistically challenging it can be. But yeah, it'd be great if you could share a little bit more about the insights you've gathered from that.
Look, absolutely. As you mentioned before, Edge have started the process of an LCA, which is going to be a fantastic tool to be able to verify the momentum moving from a fibre-based core to a plastic reusable core. So the inception of this product or idea was globally, labels are fed and wound up onto 3-inch cardboard cores. Which is fine fibre. When we sat down with some of our leading brands, we just interviewed them and asked them, where would they think some improvements could be made from the labels, the rolls, and reduction of product to landfill. And the first feedback that came back was fibre dust from the core itself, which is not a lot, but over a 24-hour period. Maintenance teams are required to come through and look at, de-dusting these materials. Clean rooms, pharmaceutical companies have all expressed, interest in looking at these areas to eliminate dust. And obviously, APCO members reducing landfill is one of the critical ones. And one unique part of the offering here is that working with the recycling partners and those companies' ability to turn our sticky material, which is the scrap that's being generated from our production sites that is currently going to landfill. We're incorporating a percentage of recycled content into the core itself. So it's a reasonably unique position. As Penn mentioned, the collaboration with partners is critical to the success of projects like this. And it's in the thousands of tons annually that can be diverted from landfill with this reusable core project. It's been 4 years in the making. I know part of it was during COVID, but it definitely offers brands a unique position to be able to also reduce their carbon emissions as well, scope 3, which is going to be more critical going forward.
Absolutely. Thanks, Andrew. Sorry, Damian. I'll pass over to Andrew, who's, as I mentioned in the outset, last but not least, he's had nearly 30 years of experience in the packaging, recycling and sustainability industry and is currently Pact Group's expert on the circular economy and is the executive advisor. So over to you, Andrew. I just got to unmute him. There we go. You should be.
I'm good now. I think.
There
Can
we
you hear
go.
me okay?
Yep, go for it.
Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. And thank you all for joining. And thank you for the opportunity to hopefully share some of my experience. I've been lucky enough to sort of lead the recycling division for Pact Group for 20 years. For the last 20 years, I've moved into an advisory role now. And prior to that, I sort of spent 10 years at Visy Recycling when developing the curbside recycling business back a long way back. So hopefully I'll have something to share with you today. Maybe just go to the next slide. Just a quick touch on Pact. We're headquartered in Melbourne. We've got over 100 manufacturing facilities where we make packaging and many other products. With over 5,000 employees, we've got a very strong sort of footprint in Australia and New Zealand, and we operate in another dozen countries in probably somewhat a smaller way. We're the largest consumer of plastic across our manufacturing network. We're getting up to close to 200,000 tonnes of resin that we consume in our manufacturing network. But at the same time, we're also the largest recycler of plastic across ANZ. We've got a clear vision to lead the circular economy across our 4 divisions. Maybe this is the next slide, just as a quick look at the 4 main divisions. We've got quite a significant reuse business and reconditioned packaging business, industrial packaging, drums, IBCs, returnable produce crates, garment hangers, security tags, which we're expanding. So quite a significant reuse business. Got the recycling division with 7 facilities with over 100,000 tonnes capacity, taking post-consumer waste or resource from household and container deposit through to food grade resins, replacing virgin resin in our supply chain and others. We've got a contract manufacturing division where we actually formulate products and make products for brand owners and retailers where they don't have those facilities in Australia. So we're doing laundry powders, detergents, personal care, nutraceuticals, things like that. And also, obviously, we've got a very, very diverse packaging offering from sort of 50 ml through to 1,000 litres. Just the next slide. One way I like this, I mean, this is an old slide, but I like it. At a glance, you can see some of the stuff we make. It's in every home, every business, every kitchen, every laundry, bathroom, garage. So I quite like showing what we do that way. So in one second, you can see what we do. That's some of the stuff we do. Next slide. Look, I know there's a few familiar names on the call. I see Rob Langford from New Zealand, a few others, other familiar names. You would have heard me talk about this before. 4 key elements to a successful circular economy. And in some respects, it's really obvious. Okay, you need security over raw material. You need the raw material. You need the availability of it. Otherwise, you're not in business. Then you need secondly, you need the recycling infrastructure and capability to convert that to high quality resins or whatever other value-added materials you're making. The third element, then you need upgrade in manufacturing platforms for the inclusion of that recycled content in your packaging. You can't just switch in and out virgin resins and things without actually upgrading some manufacturing platforms. And fourthly, and probably most importantly, you need offtake, you need demand, you need to be able to sell the material, sell the products. I suppose the point I'm making here is that they're all equally important, and they have to be equal. They have to be addressed in reasonable balance. If you don't address all parts of that supply chain, if everyone has to get fair value and reward for the work and the effort they're putting in. It's a circular economy. It's an economy. Everyone needs to be funded through various means. So, and if you don't address all those 4 issues, you do see at least the market failures that we've all seen. So I'll come back to some of these points here, but it is obvious, but we've neglected some of these elements, and I think any of this impending regulation really needs to address all of these 4 elements. Maybe the next slide. I missed the call yesterday with DQ, but I dialed in today, and so I heard what's happening, which is fantastic news. I think it provides industry with a bit more clarity around what's coming. So we do know what's coming, be it regulation or modulated fees or a combination of both. But again, I just want to re-emphasise that the regulation or the fee modulation must address each of those 4 areas and support all those 4 areas of a successful circular economy. I had a meeting earlier today with the Environment Minister for Victoria, just on a separate topic and project, but we're talking about things in general, and he, very, very supportive of the bottom point here about support and uptake of local recycled materials to create the markets. That was very pleasing to hear that. It's absolutely critical that somehow we incent and promote the local circular economy. But all the elements that we know or we thought were coming, it was confirmed in the meetings. I'm probably sure everyone attended those DQ meetings in the last 2 days, so I I won't go over the points on the page here. But on the next page is probably what I'd like to spend a few minutes on. So we know regulation is coming, and I think it's great that we've got this clarity now. So how do we adapt and thrive in this environment when we know it's coming? Okay, be you a brand owner or a retailer or someone else in the supply chain. So I think my overarching advice is to firstly understand your packaging footprint. I know Penn was talking about this before, getting the data. Understand your total footprint. And then from that information, from that data, you can then understand where you stand, where you can win, where the quick wins can be, where the design change could be, where the substrate change may have to be, where things you may have to eliminate, where things are going to take a lot longer. So I think that's really important, because only by doing that, you can then determine your pathway to the obligations. And so so this needs to be a top-down, bottom-up exercise. Quite challenging, quite difficult, but I think you have to do it. I mean, in a really simple example, you may be a brand owner or a retailer that has, I'm just make the numbers really easy. Mate, you might have 10,000 tonnes of packaging that you put on market, 10,000 tonnes. 3,000 might be cardboard. And with the work Busy and others do, you'll probably you would already be meeting your targets around recycled content in cardboard. So that's probably a tick already. You might have a couple of thousand tonnes in glass. Similarly, you're already meeting targets there that may be coming. You might have 1,000 tonnes in aluminium. So again, you're probably getting a tick through recycled content globally on aluminium. And then, just for example's sake, you might have 2,000 tonnes of plastics packaging. Okay, that's probably the more challenging area. So of your 2,000 tonnes, you need to actually know exactly what it is by substrate, by segment, down to SKU level. So you might have 1,000 tonnes of PET, 500 tonnes of HDPE, 500 tonnes of polyprop. Okay, how much of that is food? How much of that is non-food? How much of that is in beverage? How much of that is in thermoform? How much of that is in protein? How much of that is in bakery? You've got to have this detail from top down, say from the 10,000 tonnes, and bottom up from SKU. Then, by understanding that footprint, you can determine your pathway to deliver obligations and compliance in a regulated environment. You can adapt and thrive. If you look at some of the other probably bullet points on the page there, some of the things you need to understand after you've understood your footprint. What's the recycled material availability? Again, by substrate, location, security. Have I got it? Is it there long term? Is there enough volume? Is it suitable? What's a realistic inclusion level for this type of material in this type of pack? And is there opportunities to increase or over-index over time? Provenance and material traceability is critical, and others have spoken here about scope 3 CO2. You'll need to be able to trace that through the supply chain, from local curbside to remanufacture. So by having that information, then you can establish this realistic pathway to the targets and the regulation that's coming. Others have already spoken about it. Chris has spoken. Chris Foley mentioned it earlier. We've got to get started now. We've got to be cognizant of how long this takes. There could be resin qualification. There's manufacturing trials. There could be transport trials, top load trials, shelf life, whatever. Some products may demand all that. Others may be far simpler. But it can take over 12 months to get some of these recycled resins into plastics packaging. So, you have to get on with this now. We know it's coming. And I think from the start, understand your footprint, work your way through these steps in the data systematically, and it'll appear obvious where you need to play and win, adapt and thrive. That's probably enough from me. I can talk about this all day. So happy to take questions, and if there's other areas of interest that I haven't touched on. So that's it for me. Thank you.
Thanks so much for that, Andrew. I definitely have some questions, particularly on one, it's incentivizing recycled content onshore and also traceability. But before we get into that and zoom out, I'd love to sort of make some more business oriented questions to the panel. And particularly Pen, you mentioned at the beginning of your journey with Macpac, and I remember actually seeing the photos you took from being in the warehouse and actually measuring the packaging itself. For someone who's just starting out, for a business that's just starting out here, what do you recommend is the first step? Do you think it is getting into the warehouse or getting into a store and actually gathering those weights yourself with some scales, or what would you suggest?
I found it so valuable and eye-opening handling the packaging myself, actually. And the DC is how it comes from the supplier. So that's almost more important than looking at it in a retail setting, I have to say. I mean, I was, I did take some samples away and weigh some header cards and then create an average that we'd then use in our tracking. But also the poly bags, you'd look at the different sized garments that were in there, and were they using the same size poly bag for the same product, for example. It was making a note of that, just because poly bags, the size doesn't, the weight doesn't change massively, but the size does. Handle it, have a feel, because you'll also figure out whether something's heavier than it needs to be. Like a header card, for example. That's what we found with one of the first packaging changes we made, was actually swapping the socks and gloves packaging over, because it was one change essentially, but it affected so many different products. So that was gold, because we shrunk the size of the cardboard. We made it lighter. We removed the laminate from it, so it was recyclable. We added the ARL label, but we also took the opportunity, because it needed to remain on the same prong display in store, we took the opportunity to have open hooks so that it was easier for customers to get the size and the colour that they wanted from the prong. And we also took that opportunity to colour code the socks and gloves based on what activity they were for, whether it was hiking or snow sports, for example. So we looked holistically at that, and yeah, it used FSC. So it was certified. So it kind of ticked all of the boxes, because we looked holistically. It wasn't just making it recyclable. It was shrinking it, doing everything that we could at the time.
Awesome. And is it possible you could share a little bit more about that internal tool that you've developed yourself, and its functionality, particularly in tracking the improvements that you've been making, and then also how that feeds into the APCO tool? Because I suppose that tool doesn't necessarily have that functionality where you can mark off with what you've changed, how you've changed it, so that the whole team is aware of what you've done.
Yeah, sure. So our internal packaging tracker spreadsheet, it's quite a beast, but it has everything that we need. So we looked at the APCO reporting requirements, as in how many SPGs, or which SPGs did you consider when you looked at this, when you did this packaging? What ARL does it have? How many components are there? What are they? Are they called a tag or a tie or a poly bag? What are they made from? What else is there? And the logistics packaging. So we literally, every SKU have the name, the brand, the person who's responsible. But in doing that and entering the data of what our current packaging is, at the time, you're kind of reviewing it and thinking, okay, these are the changes I will make in the future. These are the packaging changes that I have done, and you could do it from a drop. We had all the APCO, the questions in a drop-down box, in a drop-down cell. So you could select, we followed the eliminate unnecessary components, for example. And then we added 2 other fields that weren't necessary for APCO reporting, that would say the future changes that we were going to do. Or we put in there, is there a product characteristic that affects the packaging, the ability to change the packaging? For example, if there are mandatory standards, if there are safety compliance standards. Sometimes you can't actually change the packaging. So we made a note of that. So we knew why we didn't need to go back and change that packaging. And we also have a drop down that says, this is the best commercially and practically viable solution at this time. So that we could all look at it and say, right, okay, well, we're not going to keep trying right now to solve this. We will focus on things that we actually can solve for now, and we'll park that for when things change. But we had the rationale so that we can explain why we did what we did and what our future plan is.
I think that's incredibly important. And especially because you're also a lot of the time bound by suppliers' capability and what they can offer. And technological changes that they may not have implemented, or partners that they don't have yet in providing you with a better alternative that something might be 6 months down the line.
Yeah, that's right. But the other thing we did, so we didn't want reporting to be the job. We wanted the data to be the job, like the insights. So there's a front page of inputs where you add in all of the granularity about the packaging for the product, and then there's an outputs sheet that has all these magic formulas that are the APCO report. So it's the APCO pre-populated with the summary and the totals from our inputs sheet that has the weight times the units sold, for example. It's really good. I mean, it's not perfect, and it is manual, which definitely makes it imperfect. But in terms of what it provides us, it's really insightful. We've even got the things like how many SKUs have you removed EPS from, or we can look and see which materials we've used have recycled content and what the percentage is. How many of them are ARL? Why do they not have the ARL? Sometimes it's because they don't have any retail packaging. So we've made that note too, so that we are accounting for what we're reporting on, which is, as I say, it's an automatic output from what we've added in.
Yeah, I think that's super important, especially noting a lot of organisations maybe leave the annual report for APCO sort of to the last few months and frantically rush to gather all the data. But if you can have this tool that's in the background that's sort of slowly, automatically summing up all the totals and tracking changes, and also as a solid reference point for the future, I think it's excellent.
And I'd just like to say in there too, you can also use assumptions. Like if you know that every t-shirt has X and Y packaging, you don't need to look at every single one. You just make your assumptions known. It is assumed that this will have this, and this. And it is assumed from these that these are the weights of the header card, the poly bag, for example. Build that stuff in, and that's part of your information gathering and setting up your frameworks and systems, from setting up some assumptions and also being really consistent with definitions. Make sure people are using the same words. Have images to back it up, and have simple swap outs and say, remove clamshells in favor of this for these types of products.
Yeah, I think those back-end policies to help guide the procurement team, the buyers, is really important, particularly when it comes to sustainable packaging choices and following those SPGs. One for you, Damian. We were talking about all the different packaging components, and there generally is a pretty big focus on primary packaging types, the sort of solid, tangible packaging that you can feel often on a product. And not often there's a lot of focus on the label itself. And as you called out, particularly with the milk bottle example, that can often be the crux, whether it is actually commercially recyclable. And I know, particularly procurement teams, there's a large focus on cost and minimizing that cost of packaging. So how can we encourage and incentivize better label design and material choices across the industry?
Look, it is important from a design phase. We are wanting to encourage our sales teams to embed themselves in the brands to ensure that any design change or that comes through, that we are promoting and offering the most sustainable label that's available. We've had a number of adopters that have taken on board the sustainable label for the natural HD. Our team, we actually had 3 adopters, not across the entire range, but they've dipped their toe in and said, look, let's give it a crack and have a look at the outcomes. And we have seen the outcome at one of the recyclers in relation to the label sinking and the natural HD floating along the recycling process, and being able to see and quantify in that bin of material that's been separated, the results of having that label that will debond and separate, including the adhesive from the flake. As again, we are working with manufacturers of raw materials across the supply chain. We're big fish in a small pond, and we are working actively through our R&D team, like all businesses are right now, to have it as close to cost neutral as possible. That is the target. If we can move, volume of face stock label material to a more sustainable option, then we have the leverage with the manufacturers of those materials to be able to play ball. It's like anything, you've got the leverage there. You're going to put yourself in a better position to be able to optimize that procurement side of things. With the adhesives, obviously we've got our own manufacturing proprietary formulations of those products that we are basing that on the current recycling infrastructure of the 2 largest manufacturers here and recyclers here, which have both opened their door to us to deep dive into the facilities and have a look at the wash waters, the recycling process, different temperatures. Can we optimize and reduce the potential temperatures from say 85 degrees Celsius down to say 72, 73 degrees Celsius. In the laboratory, we've been able to produce a very positive result, and that will have a massive impact on the energy of and outputs for those two recyclers. So yeah, we're actively out there, and the brands we're talking to in that space are they're coming on board.
Awesome. Thanks, Damian. And I suppose I've found particularly over the years that there seems to be a massive disconnect between the design and relationship with packaging being created, particularly offshore, and how recyclable it is in Australia. And I think, Andrew, you have and Pact has a really sort of significant, unique offering being onshore in recycling those products, but also designing packaging as well. How can we incentivize onshore the use of recycled content? Obviously, there's that price element coming into effect here with purchasing recycled content packaging offshore, but how can we incentivize it onshore? I'm sure eco-modulation will come into effect, but would love to hear your thoughts, Andrew and Chris.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'll open a batting, Chris, and you can come in and first wicket down.
Cheers.
Look, Australia is a net importer of packaging. Okay, so everything that lands here, we have to deal with. We've got waste export bans in place, fantastic, but we have to deal with the waste and the resource, waste/resource onshore. Without local end markets, our local circular economy cannot thrive and sustain. I mean, we're investing heavily in our collection systems, industry, our government, collection systems, container deposit systems, EPR schemes. We're investing in infrastructure capability, in manufacturing platforms, and we have regulation around demand. I mean, the missing piece at the moment is the demand piece, is the pull through. So that's where the regulation, maybe a combination of regulation and eco-modulation, can somehow incent and promote local circularity with the fee modulation, and maybe impact the behaviours of our supply chain here. I mean, you have to have that to give industry confidence to continue to invest. I mean, there's still massive infrastructure gaps. We still haven't got enough. We're still not collecting enough raw material. We still haven't got enough material that we need. We haven't got enough capacity to process what's collected now. So there's a hell of a lot more to come. We haven't got all the manufacturing platforms for inclusion. So, the demand piece is absolutely critical. Chris, maybe I'll throw to you on how any sort of eco-modulation might look.
Thanks, Andrew. Just prior to talking about eco-modulation, we're also actually just picking up Andrew's comments there around there are lots of moving parts. And one of the things we're doing at the moment is formalizing material roadmaps around a number of the key material streams, one of which is obviously flexibles, flexible plastic, rigid plastic, cardboard, fiber. And let's not just think that it's just a problem for plastics, because there's nearly 1 million tons of cardboard and paper going to landfill.
Yeah, I saw the EPA is about to release their MSW audit, and the amount of cardboard still going to landfill is insane.
So there's a big, because in theory there's collection, in theory there's reprocessing, in theory there's end markets, but clearly that space is not working. So again, it's easy to say, oh, it's all about plastic, but it's not. Coming back to the question at hand regarding the role for eco-modulation, there's two levers to drive end markets or drive the uptake. One is obviously make it more attractive through putting an incentive. So and we're just exploring how these fees can be structured. If we were to say, well, there's a reduction in the eco-modulated fee for recycled content, but there's an additional reduction for Australian recycled content to actually incentivize it. But conversely, on the other side, the eco-modulated fees that are collected can actually then be deployed to actually assist. So we may issue a contract into the market to say, essentially it's a subsidy to actually help close the gap to make Australian recycled content material as attractive or more attractive than either the virgin or the imported alternative. So there's a couple of ways that we're looking at how we can use eco-modulated fees, both on the collection side, but also on the deployment side back into the system. Because it's closed, but there's actually a third element here. Well, there's four. There's a third element, which is market development and supporting really targeted market development for the Australian recycled content. And then the fourth one is education and how we make it more attractive and how we drive consumer awareness en masse to actually appreciate and understand that one, recycled content's great. It's come a long way, and two, you should be chasing it out.
Definitely. And the other element too, and Andrew, you had this in your slide, is around traceability of recycled content, which will definitely come more into, I suppose, in the next few years, the importance of traceability. Do you guys have anything to share there? I know, Chris, as well, from your time at Kmart, I know Kmart's transparency and traceability within their supply chain is sort of really, really good. So I'd love to get some insights there.
Yeah, look, I think the traceability standards and the interoperable certifications piece, it all comes into play. So going back into my past life, we had 2,500 suppliers across Asia, 150, 170,000 SKUs, lots of moving parts, lots of data, and lots of suppliers. So we really needed to lean in on that. I think moving forward, we've just come back within APCO, because you don't want to get exposed. The game's changed with ACCC greenwashing filters on everything. So you really do need to be ahead of the curve on this and be able to trust your supply chain. And again, that's where the certifications that you have, we're not suggesting go and create your own. We're not suggesting trade off a letter from a supplier. You will need to lean into existing certifications where they are in existence. we're obviously also pushing for traceability standards to be much clearer for everybody's sake, whether that be domestic or international. And I think in many respects, this traceability piece is actually it actually just naturally supports domestic sourcing of your material. So, and then whether it be sourcing through Pact or others, that line of sight is obviously, and trust me from experience, that line of sight, we can go and literally tap Andrew on the shoulder when like we could, and we did, and you could actually eyeball them versus trying the same with overseas sourcing channels.
I think I just a couple of comments to add. You know, in a regulated environment, customers, you know, they will demand this, they will require it, they need it. It's all about trust. You know, we said traceability and transparency. You need to be able to ensure you can demonstrate provenance of the material, and it's all about trust. I think the national framework is great, but it's fairly general. So I think, you know, whatever systems are in place, they need to be interoperable. So you're not just advantaging large business as opposed to smaller or medium enterprises, but you must have a system that can be audited against and is recognised with global standards to make sure the playing field is level. Totally.
Yeah.
And my understanding is that DQ's discussion paper will actually talk to this and does call this out. And there, for those on the call who were involved or provided insight into APCO's consultation work on recycled content standards or recycled content options, I know that we had a working group of about 40 key stakeholders across the system, but we had over 300 businesses provide insights and information. So that was provided to DQ, and I know that they reference it in their discussion pack that's coming through.
Absolutely. All right. Well, just given the interest of time, I might just jump to some of the audience's Q&As. First and foremost from Dawn has DQ given an indication on their preferred option? Did you pick up on anything in that, Chris? No.
Look, I mean, it's yeah, I mean, I think they're genuinely putting it out there. There are 3 options. So it's now up to industry to engage in the process and provide.
Yeah, and I'm sure that paper too will probably illuminate what the finer details. There was another question about that someone missed the webinar yesterday, but I think the paper tomorrow will shed a lot of light. Another question was where does compostable packaging in its collection, processing and logistics stand for in short-term changes? I know there's been a lot of changes, particularly with Victoria recently, even banning compostable bin liners from their facilities. Andrew, do you have any insights or thoughts on compostable packaging and its functionality? See your eyes raised.
Oh, look, it has a role to play, but you need to be able to trust the product. You need to be able to trust the system where that product may be going to. It needs to be clearly identified so it doesn't contaminate mainstream or other established recycling streams. It gets to a tipping point at some stage. It gets to a tipping point if you have a certain amount of compostable biodegradable, where it can have significant impacts if they're crossing streams. So again, I'm not an expert in this space, but it's a really I might throw to others in the audience and on the panel. Chris, have you got a view on this?
Oh, look, it's a real challenge. And just if I put my brand owner hat on from a couple of years ago, we thought sort of, compostable's sort of the great sort of hope. Move out of plastic and into compostable, and then you suddenly get into it, and it's just like, hang, this is fraud. There's a lot of challenge, and I can see Pen nodding her head as well. It's like, and it's really awkward because in South Australia there's a lot of infrastructure, and their standards and what they would accept is way different to New South Wales, and you get convergence of issues like PFAS, and it's a complicated space. So tread warily, and again, this is where harmonisation, and certainly in the background, we're trying to convene some harmonisation across jurisdictions and work with jurisdictions to flesh out some of these, because we need all pathways, we need all options as we transition to a circular economy. But it is don't just take because it looks great and there's lots of flashy lights. It looks sparkly. You need to be really sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, from experience, we had several projects that similarly we were thinking it was sort of the next best thing, and all of a sudden, they're brought to their standstill because of all the findings. But jumping to the next question is for you, Damian, and one that I've also seen firsthand in distribution centres is label backing. Currently, there's no recycling solution, and it was noted here in the question that's one of the few items left in DCs that cannot be diverted from landfill. Do you have any insights there, or anything on the horizon?
Absolutely. We've had a program on for the last 2 years now, where we are capturing the glassine liner from our brands, diverting it from landfill, and it's being converted into sealing insulation with 2 manufacturers in Australia. So they get the material delivered from us in roll form, they shred it, they add a fire retardant to it, put it through a bagging process, and then they take it to their various distribution points. This is a product that is replacing newsprint. Obviously, newsprint is now very difficult to secure. So historically, newsprint has been the preferred option for sealing insulation. The label backing has now replaced 100% of newsprint for sealing insulation. There are only 2 manufacturers or converters of label liner in Australia. One is in Sydney, one is in South Australia. And we have both those on board, and they're looking for more material. So the adoption of that product as an Australian solution is available now.
That's great to hear. Thanks for sharing that. Maybe the very last question, just given the interest of time and wrapping up, and something I sort of hinted at with your chat, Damian, is the challenges associating with adopting reusable packaging, particularly in warehouse to retail location use cases. Perhaps you have some insights, particularly, as I mentioned, the return on investment can sometimes outweigh the environmental benefit. Do you have any insights from the business case that you've developed on that? And is it weighted towards the environmental benefit, or is there some cases where it is feasible financially?
Absolutely. Benefits to both. Obviously, there are commercial implications into particularly the label liner. There's another project on here from a scalability position. And that's going to require an investment of a very, very bespoke piece of equipment that would just process the label liner and desiliconize the paper itself, which is a very unique proposition. That capital's got a 5-year payback.
I see.
So there's a definite positioning there, and as particularly Andrew has said, that offtake partner needs to be guaranteed prior to any investment. Good and they will come is not what is the preferred process.
I think one comment I've got on this one, and having both wearing my Kmart group hat but also my current hat, we've done at APCO we've done some work, actually including work with Damian and a couple of other industry organisations on reuse. And in turn, we had we've got a long-standing program within Kmart Group on coat hanger reuse, and we actually use Pact Retail Services. There's good data to put it in context. Kmart and Target through Pact Group, circa 450 million coat hangers get reused, but that's a big investment. But the numbers do work, and that's just the humble coat hanger. But unless you actually do the math, to Pen's point, unless you actually have the data to actually understand where those opportunities are, it all looks doom and gloom, but then you suddenly break it down and go, well, hang on a second, that's crazy. Whether it's replacing or whether it's replacing single-use coat hangers and finding the economic upside, or replacing cardboard shippers, and or all of this pallet wrap and everything that goes with it, do the math, and suddenly you start to see there's opportunity, particularly in those supply chains. And we've got some of the world's best, whether it be Pact or CHEP or whoever it is. I've had a fair bit of exposure to the Pact group and their precursors in and around retail solutions. Good things can happen in that space. Get your data up and you can develop a business case.
Yeah.
Can I just add in something there too? There's another benefit, and that is team member engagement. When they see you doing things like this, or if there or if opportunities that they've identified in their day job, if they're like, oh, you guys, we're now doing X, Y, and Z. Oh, did this upsets me that we don't have a responsible solution for such and such. Empowering, and team members need to see you doing it, setting things in place, and then reporting back on it, which is another reason why data is really good, because you take the small wins and then you know that it's not that hard to make a change, and then you make another change, and then all of a sudden change doesn't seem so difficult, and you've got more people engaged and more people into it, believing you, supporting you, cheerleading.
Absolutely, a great point. And I think like anything with reuse, it seems like there's that initial CapEx cost, but then there's a break-even point where you end up saving money, but you just have to get through that initial point. So I think we'll leave it there. I'll hand back to Justin. Thank you all so much for your talks and the discussion as well. It's been very insightful.
Great, thanks, Mike. And so we're a little bit over time, so I'll keep it brief. But I just wanted to extend again a very special thank you to our esteemed speakers for taking the time to share your expertise and insights today. We've had some really positive comments already. I've taken a lot of notes during this session, so my hand can certainly use a break from all the writing. And also thank you to everybody who has stayed until the end. We had great attendance today, so hopefully some of the insights that our speakers shared today will be useful to help everybody in their journey moving forward. So keep an eye out for a follow-up email, which will also include a link to a downloadable packaging guidance resource that Edge has developed, basically just to help guide your approach moving forward. And also just wanted to say that, at Edge, of course, we're proud sustainability nerds and love talking shop. So don't hesitate to reach out to discuss anything sustainability related, especially packaging. And of course, as a bonus for being here today, we're happy to offer all attendees a free consultation just to discuss your sustainability priorities. So more details in the email to follow. So we'll wrap it up there. Thank you again, everybody. It was a really fantastic session, and have a great day.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Bye.